When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast, a podcast about the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Prepare yourself to step behind the ropes and leave the official tour of the story of the popes and Christianity. I am your host, Steve Guerra, and I thank you for joining me on this journey. Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Steve here again with another installment of our Catholic history in the early 19th century in the United States. And I'm very excited to be joined again by John Fagin. He was a previous guest who discussed a little bit about Buffalo history and gave us a little bit of context and texture for the series. And we're going to get a little bit more of that context and texture today, talking about the burned over district, which was a phenomenon of Western New York, but it really ties into the whole religious fabric of the United States during the early to mid 19th century. And John, of course, is from the Buffalo Presidential Center, and I won't speak too much to him. I'll let him describe himself. John, maybe just tell the audience, if they haven't listened to the previous episode, a little bit about yourself and your background before we dive too deeply in.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Steve. My background, I am presently at the Buffalo Presidential Center on the board of trustees there. Previously, throughout the past 25 years in the Buffalo region, I have worked as a volunteer to do tours of the region, the Martin House, Buffalo Tours, and Explore Buffalo. I did many tours of the city. Most recently, my one tour that I have done recently is the anti-slavery tour of Lafayette Square. And this has brought me into an area of the burned over district as a precursor to all of that. I have, it's not my work. I'm retired from my work. I worked as a chemist at an aviation company. And the history is just a fascination on the side, which I can now go full bore now that I'm retired.
Awesome. Well, let's go full bore. And the first place to really start is the Second Great Awakening, because that's really where all of this comes out of. And I did a little bit of an episode on the Great Awakening, so I don't think any of this will be brand new. Well, at least the broad strokes won't be brand new, but I think we'll get into a very different and a new perspective of it. Can you give us a little rundown of the Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, that is?
Yeah, the background as I see it is it's a process, and it could have started with the Enlightenment of the late 1600s, where that starts to break down some of the old world views of deference and deference to your elders, to your clergy, to those. And through the 1700s, you're in the colonial period, you still have the hierarchy in the religious and also in the social views. As far as the religious and you had the New England Puritanism through Presbyterianism and Congregationalism. In the South, you had Anglican or the Church of England. But once the Revolution hits, now you have afterwards have a move towards democracy. Even though the founders weren't thrilled about going towards democracy, the states and local levels were. And people started to get involved both politically and in their religious views. And this is where the Second Great Awakening comes out of. Once you're past the American Revolution, of course, you had the French Revolution in there somewhere. But it's a movement that goes towards the people. And as I said, the old world is starting to fall apart. The idea of deference, defer to your elders, to your clergy, to your betters, that's falling apart, all from the Enlightenment on, but it's really hitting now after the American Revolution. And you call it the new guard is coming in. People are thinking of freedom. They're thinking of equality, representation. All these things are eroding life, the previous life. They're taking away, eroding the authority that they had been under, the traditions, the fact that the education of the clergy, a lot of the Second Great Awakening has to do with anti-clericalism in the sense of education and putting the clergy in a position above the people. Now, with equality and freedom, people want to be on the same level. And that's where this movement comes out of. There's some great leaders that are now going through the United States in the early 1800s. You could call them circuit riders and the camp meetings. Mainly the Methodists and the Baptists were big on this in that early period. Now they're going out of the center. In other words, they're going out of the cities, the eastern cities. They're going to the frontier where the people are. And the camp meetings are the most famous one, as I've come across, is this one in Kentucky in 1800 or 1804 in that period, where the idea of the camp meeting was all the people gathered together. And then you have some outstanding preachers preach the idea of equality. You know, the message can come. The preachers of the time, and I'll give you an example of a couple of them in a minute. But they typically defied the clerical authority. You don't have to listen to what the clergy is saying. You can learn for yourself what the Bible is talking about. You can, you're shifting away from the clergy preaching, and now you're getting participation from the people. You're in the early days, anyways, you do get that classic emotion and community power, the fainting, shouting, yelling that goes on at these recruitment camp meetings. But they became so popular that the circuit riders that came out, originally the Methodist circuit riders and then the Baptists and others, they're coming out, and the camp meetings were a great way for the rural people to meet each other, and also for the itinerant preachers to work the crowd.
Hey, Steve here. If you're enjoying the History of the Papacy podcast, consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/History of the Papacy. We're working toward going completely listener funded, which means no more ads ever. When you join, you get early access to episodes, monthly book giveaways, and most importantly, your name is added to the History of the Papacy Diptychs, our own list of commemorated supporters. You can become an Antioch level supporter for just $3 per month. But it makes a huge difference to making the History of the Papacy ad-free and independent. Nobody likes ads, not you, not me, and I'm the guy who records them. So let's just get rid of them. Visit patreon.com/History of the Papacy and join today.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World
I praise the
off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hello, I'm David Jeremiah. As America celebrates 250 years, we would do well to remember that the strength of a nation is found not only in what it builds, but in what it remembers. And the greatest thing America must never forget is God. We have been blessed in remarkable ways, and those blessings should lead us not to pride, but to gratitude, not to self-confidence, but to humble dependence upon the Lord. This is a time to renew our commitment to truth, faith, and character, and to pray that God in His mercy and grace would continue to guide and bless the United States of America.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting that you bring up the revivals and these camp meetings because, and we discussed it in the earlier episode, these were really common, and it was common enough that they would have these revivals. And at one revival, and I don't think people even today can really grasp how large these were. A major one revival could have as many people at it as the entire Catholic population of the United States at that time. That these were massive, massive events. Some of them, at least.
The Catholic population was really minuscule at this early period. For instance, the Kentucky revival, they call it the Cane Ridge Kentucky revival. From what I've seen, you could have 10,000 people there, up to 20,000. And this was, nearly 10% of the population of Kentucky. It's massive at that time. And it does gain, it gains in popularity as it goes on. But it needed two things. The camp meetings needed these, circuit riders who led a very difficult life when you think about it, going by horse or even by carriage by some, but mainly by horse, into the frontier, into the rural areas. And the rural areas include Western New York at this time, upstate New York. And it was a life only for the young men, and their lifestyle was rough. It was tough. And these leaders needed to connect with the people in certain ways.
Are there a couple of people who you think might be worth mentioning?
There are two of them, both of them Methodist. And the Methodists were very famous at this time for being the circuit riders going in there. One of them was named Lorenzo Dow. He was an eccentric, almost like you could maybe like a John the Baptist type. He was he may have preached to more people than any other in this era. He started in New York State, upstate, in the early 1800s. But he goes through Mississippi, Alabama, a lot of different places. And his message, I mean, it was his mannerisms that were quite fascinating. He shouted, he screamed, he cried, he begged, he flattered, he told stories, he told jokes. And one of the fascinating, like I said, he looked like John the Baptist in the sense that, well, he was personally not hygienic. I mean, even for back in those days, apparently. And one person described him as he had long hair and beard that have never met a comb. So it's and this Lorenzo Dow was very popular. Now he was out to destroy all the hierarchy values out there and just essentially have the people take care of everything. You can learn on the Bible yourself. You can put your own churches together, and a fascinating individual that represents one aspect of it. The other one quite a bit different and yet similar, was Francis Asbury, yet another Methodist. Now, he also traveled on horseback by carriage. Some say he along with the Wesley brothers were one of the founders of the Methodist Church. I'll take that word for it. I haven't studied it that much, but he was throughout his life, he averaged about 6,000 miles a year, and he had the idea of going back to the apostolic lifestyle. In other words, the apostles, and going back to their communal lifestyle, how they, the simplicity of that style. He felt the outpouring of the Holy Spirit could happen to unlettered or illiterate individuals. You don't have to come from Harvard Divinity School to be able to do this. In fact, that can be a negative. And that's what they're fighting against with the anti-clericalism. And he had a phrase, and he said, "We must suffer with if we labor for the poor." So much of this went out to the poor, the frontiers people, and this was he was different from Lorenzo Dow in that he felt a central authority was needed. In his case, he felt he was the central authority, but whereas Lorenzo Dow was more chaotic in that review. And a lot of this second Great Awakening, has to do with breaking down the authority of the hierarchy, the authority of the puritanical view of God and religion. But the Methodists, and then later the Baptists and various other groups started coming out. And we're talking the 1800s, 1820 period. They're making fertile ground for where we're headed towards the burned over district.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking, and where you're kind of going to is that this is monumental change that's going on in this, not just the Second Great Awakening, but you laid the context, the political context of all these things that are going on in the early 1800s, all this kind of change. And I think we often see through history, and you're obviously a lover of history, that there can be a lot of reactions from that kind of big change. And would you think, even before we get into the nuts and bolts of the burned over district, that it really was a reaction to this gigantic change that had come through politically, religiously, culturally?
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the fascinating features of this. They follow a parallel path. From the revolution up into Jeffersonian republicanism up to Jacksonian, the Jacksonian view. And it's the people, the 1790s, the people of the states and local areas are beginning to form democratic societies politically, and they're getting involved in politics. They're taking the role that before was left only to the upper class, if you will. So the classes are being fought with here. Middle class is beginning to form, and in that process, they're starting to bring down the deference to whoever your elder was or your greater person. But yes, politically this is going on, and religiously, it's become the democratization of American Christianity is basically what it is. There, you're taking the European Christianity that came over and held through the colonial period.
Moving into the actual burned over district, we've laid the groundwork of where it's coming out of, but there's something really specific and special, I guess you might say, about Western New York. And it's not just the cold weather or the waterfalls or the food. It's the culture that came there with some of the background of the immigration patterns. Yes. And that it even happened before the Erie Canal. Then the Erie Canal happens and is a monumental change. What was I don't know, the breeding ground or the fertile soil of this one particular locality in the whole United States that really created this burned over district.
The upstate New York area, which would be roughly Albany to Buffalo region and Finger Lakes, north to Canada, south to the Pennsylvania line, was immigrated in the early 1825, mainly from New Englanders coming from Vermont, Connecticut. They were coming into the region known as Yankees. And then in the southern tier portion of the state were people from Pennsylvania, New York, and also downstate New York. Yankees and Yorkers, they called them. So this was prior to the mass immigration from Europe. This is migration in the United States itself. The New Englanders dominated the region, but they brought their culture with them in the culture of in their social life. And you see it a lot, the background of Puritanism with the Congregational and Presbyterian denominations. They came with them. They also brought a strong moral intensity with them. So as the Second Great Awakening is passing through this region, they're also starting to do their own break from their religious past and mold it into something that works for them. So essentially, it's the New Englanders that are coming through here.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hi, everyone. If you've been injured in an accident that was not your fault, listen up. We have legal professionals standing by to answer your questions for free. Call now and find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth. Call 800-910-7500. I'm here with spokesman John Wolf. So, John, tell everyone listening who should call right now.
Well, Maria, first off, thank you for having me here. It's always nice to answer the listeners' questions. Now, as far as who should call in, anyone who's been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, give us a call right now. 800-910-7500. You'll find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth.
Thanks, John. You heard it, folks. Take advantage of this opportunity and call now. 800-910-7500.
Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center. May not be available in all states. Not available in California.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. And I think before we start, what I was always thinking, I kind of got this feeling from you, maybe from our off mic conversations, I use the term kids lightly, but we're Buffalo kids. And you get and it shows how micro that this can be, is that in Buffalo, you don't really get a sense of how New England, a lot of Western New York is. Buffalo doesn't feel New England, but you get not too far out of Buffalo and you get a much more New England character.
Yes, today, because of the great immigrations that came through, the Irish, the Germans, the Italians, the Polish, it's quite different from the early 1800s. In the early 1800s, the Buffalo region, which was essentially just a frontier village and upstate, the original migrators here, after the Native Americans were pushed out, were from New England. So you get that original New England feel here. Now, they moved on from here to Ohio, the Western Reserve, and they moved on to Wisconsin. The New Englanders keep a lot of this, their culture going by moving. They eventually get into we're talking now later, the anti-slavery portion of a lot of it's driven by them and their culture. But for upstate New York, and the burned over district, which takes place in the 1820s. The fertile land, the fertility of this area was pushed by the arrival of the New England people and essentially the ending of the Second Great Awakening, where they did come through this region. Preachers came through, starting to bring it an Americanization of Christianity. So by the time, and the burned over district, I'm going to talk just about one man, Charles Finney. By the time Finney makes his move, the people he's going to are already ready to accept the message. I guess that's the key. And then that's where the Second Great Awakening feeds into this area. I don't know if the burned over district is considered part of the Second Great Awakening or not, or if it's just something that happened afterwards. I'm not sure of that, but I can see the connection between them.
Yeah, so speak a little bit generally about this burned over district, and then we can kind of dig into the details.
Okay, I'll talk about it generally, but in the upstate New York area, there were many revivals during this period, 1825 to 35. In fact, there were probably over 1,300 from what, not all by Finney, but there were many revivalists that came through the region. And their basic premise, their basic talk, it was a battle against Calvinism. Calvinism was with the Puritans through the Presbyterians and Congregationalists in this period. They were going through a rough period of change. Calvinism mainly was a predestination idea of Calvinism, where God already knows everything, so he knows if you're saved or not, no matter what you do. It's kind of a negative, defeatist look. Christ died only for the saved, and your free will is not free. It's in bondage to sin. So that was part of the early 1600s, part of European thought too. And that's what the Second Great Awakening and then the burned over district and preachers were fighting against. And it was called Arminianism, out of Jacob Arminius. He was out of 1500s Dutch theologian, I believe.
Yeah.
And they come through with their basic premises. Your will is free. You do have a free will. You can accept or reject God's offer of salvation. Predestination is not the answer. Christ died for everyone, not just for the saved. And you can resist or accept God's grace. So they're essentially putting it on the individual, saying you can make that choice. It hasn't been chosen ahead of time. It's for you to decide which way you want to go. And that's how most of the preachers were coming across at that time. Bringing the people, the poor, the lower class, and even the upper classes into thinking like that. Don't think that everything is already set. You can control it. You can, and that's the basic premise of what the teaching is going to be. When you get to Finney, you get to, he emphasizes choosing. You can choose to be good, to be evil.
And that's a very good summary of it. I'm sure people can out there pick about on the edges, but I mean, that's essentially the argument.
Yeah. Yes. And then when Finney comes in, he's born in the late 1700s, but he's born up in the village of Adams, up in the northern part of New York State, along the coast of Lake Ontario. So he's going up there towards the Thousand Islands, up in that area where he grows up. His family's originally from Vermont. He was a lawyer, and when he was 21, I believe, he was feeling something about his soul. So it's either a myth or a story that he puts out that the one day he leaves his law office in Adams and goes into the woods and prays. And out of that, he becomes a converted man, goes back to the law office, quits being a lawyer, and immediately gets into being an evangelist. So he studies in the Presbyterian version for a couple of years, and then finally starts to work as an itinerant evangelist, starting in the North Country and then working his way down. Now, Finney had some great advantages over other evangelists. First, he was physically fit to handle this type of life. He had an engaging personality, a powerful voice, which, of course, all evangelists would have to have. But he also had something that they all seem to have, too, is this remarkable eyes. And you hear this often with various people. I've even heard it with Frederick Douglass. You know, it was his eyes. His eyes are just, in the case of Finney, they were deep blue, magnetic eyes, and they seemed to look directly at you. And the one thing Finney did was he did not read his sermons. He did not write them. He spoke them directly to the audience. He spoke and he looked, and he even learned a lot of their names. So he made a personal connection. So he's driving the individuals, and you have some eyewitnesses who I'll get to in a bit, but they describe him as they feel like they're speaking directly to him, and they're looking directly into their soul as he's speaking. Now, Finney was not in the camp meetings, the tent type things. He would go place to place in upstate, and he would get a church or a building to talk from. And he would try to get the local ministers to work with them. Some did, some didn't. But the people came in droves. And he started out in 1821. His first major success came in the Utica area around the winter of 25-26. It was the winter time, because the winter time was the time when the Erie Canal would stop. The people would stop working. It would freeze over. So he had the people. He had them. They were nothing to do or very little to do. So a preacher comes to town, you have them for the winters. And his first great success was the Utica revivals in 1825, 26, and he went to Rome, Auburn, various areas around the upstate area there.
Go ahead, get into some more details on that.
A typical sermon, or as I said, he did not write his sermons. He was against that. So he would talk to the people, and a typical talking of his was he asserted that the Calvinist doctrine is not the way that God works. He emphasizes the importance of choosing. You can choose good over evil. He emphasized free will, the individual's ability to respond to God's grace. Many of the, as I said, the old school preachers read their sermons. Finney addressed people by their name. And he even persuaded women to testify in public, which was rare at that time. Women were a major part of his sermons and doctor and his revivalisms. The women were the ones that mainly went to church. You get the women will then work on husbands, fathers, sons, and typical for a preacher of Finney's style was simple, sentences short. He had frequent repetitions to make a point. You can think of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream," where he repeats the "I have a dream" portion of it constantly to make a point. It's that type of repetition that can move the preaching, move the multitudes. But prayer was his main vital feature. And after he spoke, and he typically spoke 3 times on Sunday and then a couple times during the week. But he also visited potential converts during the week, working with the women in the prayer circles. And one thing he did have, and I believe others used it as well, but he had something called the anxious bench, which would be up in the altar area. And he would clue in on some of the important individuals of the region to see who's ready to convert on the cusp. And he'd invite them to sit up there on the anxious bench so that during his sermons and workings, they would convert during the sermon. And if they were, and that could lead to conversions within the crowd, if they see some of their leaders finally giving in to Finney's words. And that was I don't know if it's a ploy or whatever, but it's a good way. If the major people of the community are believing this, then hey, we're on this. We can jump in too. So that was those were part of it, and then he also that was mainly in Utica, and he went after Utica. He went around upstate, and then he went to Philadelphia, New York City. And Finney was human, and Charles Finney was absorbed with the urbanism of New York. And he thought, well, there's thousands here. Well, if we could convert these, we're onto something, versus the rural aspect of this all. But he was convinced to go back to the rural side, the upstate area, and work with that because the people are more receptive. Once you get into the urban areas, you get more commerce, you get business. People have deflections. They don't necessarily focus on their religious views or their spiritual health. And he came back, and in Rochester in 1830, he was invited to go back, and he went there in the wintertime. 3 Presbyterian churches there were in a quarrel, and they had hoped that Charles Finney would come there and help them be an arbiter. And Finney, and these are the 2 major ones, the Utica 1825-26, and then Rochester of 1830-31, the winter. These are the 2 major success stories of Finney's career, the ones that made him famous. And in Rochester, he was there for the winter, very successful. He converted many. Immediately after Rochester is when he went to Buffalo, spring of 1831. Buffalo was not as successful historically, but Finney talks about it in his autobiography, Going to Buffalo, and he talks about a couple of his converts at that point. Now, Buffalo in the spring, 1831, spring is the time when the jobs start to come back. The ice melts, the canal reopens, the lake is free. So people are going back to work. Not the best time for for people to be looking for, religious growth. They're more interested now in jobs and money. But he did have some success in Buffalo, and there were three converts that I think are pretty interesting. If you're familiar with the history of the city, one of them was Samuel Wilkson, who is sometimes considered a father of Buffalo. He is the one that put forth the effort to dredge the Buffalo Creek and turn it into a harbor in 1822-23. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Stephen. Mm-hmm. And he became a leader of the region, also very wealthy. Well, he fell under the spell of Finney and converted to a level of Christianity. 2 others, one of them, John C. Lord, was a lawyer, and Lord became a preacher. Very conservative Presbyterian preacher, who became significant in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. One of the leading preachers. Great last name, by the way, for a preacher, isn't it, Lord?
Yeah, for sure.
So even though, Lord is interesting to me anyway, because, he converted under Finney's views, but he was extremely conservative in his political thought. He agreed with Fillmore in the fugitive slave law, and he agreed that slavery was legal and borne by the Bible. But in 1864, he talks about the Emancipation Proclamation. So he's got a conflicting, or maybe a changing view as time goes on. Very conservative. He was. So you have Samuel Wilson, John C. Lord, and the third one, and Charles Finney talks about this man much in his autobiography. The man's last name was Hosmer. He was a Hosmer. He was a leader of the Buffalo region, and it was his wife that was working with Finney to work on Hosmer. He resisted for quite some time, according to Finney's autobiography. And then finally, he did convert to Christianity. Finney's not pushing any particular denomination. He's just pushing the idea of going Christian. Hosmer's son becomes Pastor Hosmer. Hosmer's son becomes a Unitarian preacher of the First Unitarian Church in Buffalo. And it's the son that is the preacher for Millard Fillmore at the First Unitarian Church at 110 Franklin Street. And Fillmore brought John Quincy Adams there in 43 and then Abraham Lincoln in 61. So Hosmer, the son, reaped the benefits of Hosmer, the father.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hi, everyone. If you've been injured in an accident that was not your fault, listen up. We have legal professionals standing by to answer your questions for free. Call now and find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth. Call 800-910-7500. I'm here with spokesman John Wolf. So, John, tell everyone listening who should call right now.
Well, Maria, first off, thank you for having me here. It's always nice to answer the listeners' questions. Now, as far as who should call in, anyone who's been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, give us a call right now. 800-910-7500. You'll find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth.
Thanks, John. You heard it, folks. Take advantage of this opportunity and call now. 800-910-7500.
Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center may not be available in all states, not available in California.
Yeah, and just as a little side fact or a fun fact, that Unitarian Church, if I'm not mistaken, it's still there. You can't visit it because it's not a church anymore, I don't think. I think it's a private company of some sort or another, but it's a really amazing architectural jewel of the city of Buffalo.
Yes, it still exists. It's one of the few, built in the 1830s. It's one of the few that exists from that point, but it has changed quite a bit over the years. But the basic idea of it is you can see it. Yeah, and they have a signage in front of it, saying that was Millard Fillmore's church, and he brought John Quincy Adams there at one time and Abraham Lincoln at another time.
And so Finney is just one of those fascinating characters that comes up in American history, that he's not maybe one of the ones who comes up in your high school or maybe even your college U.S. history class. But this guy was active for such a long time, and the things that he did really underwrote a lot of the much bigger events of American history that everybody is familiar with.
Yes. Finney, by 1835, Finney has stopped with the itinerant work, and he took a position at Oberlin College in Ohio first as a professor, and I believe later as a president of the college. He did settle down at that point. But his legacy is what really defines him. And much of his message was, if as you become Christian, you should be doing works, and you should be working towards something that helps humanity.
And this idea of works and that you have to do something really gets reflected in this burned over district. There's a lot that came out of it, and this is what makes Finney truly important, is not necessarily the specifics of his, but he did have some converts that went on to bigger and better careers. And one of them was Theodore Dwight Weld, not well known today. He was an anti-slavery abolitionist, but in the 1830s, he and William Lloyd Garrison were probably the top two. Weld was the one converted by Finney, and Weld was around in Ohio, upstate New York, putting together anti-slavery societies throughout, speaking and preaching about abolitionism. He was influenced by Finney. Another one that was influenced by Finney would be Henry Stanton, who married Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Both of them had heard Finney speak. I have a quote here from Henry Stanton, and he was also an anti-slavery man in the Liberty Party. And he described Finney's speaking style as, I'll quote it here. He said, "It did not sound like preaching, but like a lawyer arguing his case. The discourse was a chain of logic." And then he says, "I have heard many celebrated orators in various parts of the world.
Taken all in all, I never knew the superior of Charles G. Finney." That's Stanton talking about it.
One author, Whitney Cross, who wrote Burned Over District, an excellent book on the region, he describes Finney's way is quite different from, say, Lorenzo Dow or a lot of the early Second Awakening preachers. But he said, "No agonizing souls fell in the aisle, no raptured ones shouted hallelujahs. Rather, the great evangelist, in an unclerical suit of gray, acted like a lawyer, arguing before a court and jury, talking wit, verve, and informality." So he had a whole different style, but it was a style that connected with the people. And out of this upstate burned over district, which generally 1825 to 35, that 10-year period, out of that came many movements, including Mormonism came out of the area, and then Joseph Smith out of Palmyra, New York. Millerism, with William Miller and the Second Coming, that comes out of it. Organized women's rights movements, and that's followed by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Seneca Falls. All these things are happening in upstate. The Shakers movement, which was a strange, interesting movement of religious believers in the celibate life. You even have the Oneida Perfectionists, like John Humphrey Noyes, whose religious doctrine believed that individuals could achieve a state of perfection in this world. And they often lived in utopias that would last, 5 to 15 years, depending upon. Education reform came out of this. And these are all individuals who heard Finney, who learned from Finney, who decided to become Christian, not go into the ministry, but to go into other areas. The biggest ones, prison reform, education reform, And the two biggest were probably the women's rights movement and the anti-slavery movement. Those are the key things, and that's what Finney brings to American history. Is just as Finney went to a fertile land in upstate New York, Finney also fertilizes more land for the anti-slavery movement, for the women's rights movements. So one feature leads to another, to another, to another. It's a fascinating thing about history.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about it, this isn't like ancient history or, the Oneida movement or the Shakers. They're a quirky little footnote to history. But these things you mentioned, education reform, women's rights movement and the slavery movement, which really morphed into the civil rights movement, prison reform, all these different things you mentioned, those aren't ancient history. Those are things that are impacting us right here today. And probably long after we're gone, they're going to be the major issues of the day in the United States.
And the temperance movement was another major one of the time.
Yeah. So another one, which really leads into drug control, which is another major issue that.
Yes. So that, to me, that's the key to the whole burned over district as far as today. Finney being he wasn't the only one, but he is the one that made the historical connection. He's the one that made his name for himself and made many converts that then moved on to movements that would help humanity, essentially. And Finney himself never became, he was against slavery, but he never became an abolitionist. He always stayed in the religious department. He let others take the rope and go with that. And that's what he was doing here. Charles Finney is worthy of historical study because of his influence, and it just shows how much one person can influence many others. And if we all have that power, he was just an average person who found his skill and his niche in life and ran it to the fullest, and in the process helped others find their skills and niches in life. And it's a good example that all it takes is one person to influence two others.
Yeah. And I think that, I kind of was a little concerned going into this episode that maybe this was just something of a personal curiosity and a mutual curiosity. But this really, and I think this conversation solidified it, that this is a hugely important topic for U.S. history.
Much overlooked.
Yes.
I was speaking to somebody at the Presidential Center a couple of weeks ago, and he said few, if any, really know much about this period. And it's, there's a few authors out there that obviously wrote books. Whitney Cross and Nathan Hatch have excellent books out on it. But, it's a very low featured area. In fact, I never heard of the burned over. I'm 70. I never heard of it until about 15 years ago. So, and people I talk to they ask me, well, what is it? What is the burned over district?
Yeah, and I think that even if you dig a little deeper, it just kind of gets lost as a religious phenomenon that came out of the Second Great Awakening. But it's so much more than that. It's not just a footnote of a footnote. It really is the fountainhead of what a country would become.
We're sticking with upstate New York, but there were various areas like the Western Reserve in Ohio. They had their own burned over district. There were places in Wisconsin and Vermont and Connecticut. But the one that, if anybody hears about it, the top one is the upstate New York one, mainly from Utica to Rochester to Finger Lakes region and to some degree Albany and Buffalo. But the influence of it is often either forgotten or never learned. Sometimes I look at it within the my area of interest is really the anti-slavery movement, and when that pops up in the 1830s with Garrison and others. Now I can see where the fertile land was prior. Not that Garrison was involved he wasn't in the burned over district. He wasn't, he laid, he had his own influences, but you can see it's interesting to see how one event leads to another. The anti-slavery movement becomes very powerful. Well, why? Where did it come from? It doesn't come overnight from anywhere. It's like World War II didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, you have the 20 years of build up to that, those are I think fascinating, and to see how the second awakening features in the burned over district, which features in the anti-slavery movement. And then you can go back even farther to see how the Enlightenment process just starts to change people's thinking process of going from hierarchy to reason, instead of believing what the clerics say or what your king says. You now can think for yourself. And it's a slow process moving down through the generations. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is, and what I think my big takeaway has been from these conversations is history is so hyper localized, but it has these reverberations. And, one example that I keep going back to is there's a small town near Buffalo called Alden that is chock full of Underground Railroad sites, but it was also the only town, or the hamlet of Town Line, which is even a smaller part of Alden, actually seceded from the Union. And you have that, it's in your backyard. If I can encourage people, go read a sign. If you're in Buffalo, go to the Buffalo Presidential Society and talk to people like John here. They're in your town. Go do it, because it's there. Yes, there's podcasts, and please like and subscribe and all of that, and go listen to more podcasts. But there's resources right in your own city, in your own town, that you can access and find all these fascinating pieces of history.
I agree. Yeah. All history is local. Yeah.
Well, I really thank you so much, John. This was a fascinating conversation. Our last conversation was fascinating. I hope we can find another topic we can get you on here for again.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciated your time, and I've enjoyed every moment here. It's great talking about these, and it's a learning process for me too. It helps keep my brain going too when I get to discuss these issues.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
The Historical Jesus Podcast is the sweeping saga of the life and times of Galilean Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the faith, religion, and church founded to honor and disseminate his acts and teachings. Join me, Mark Vinette, on this fascinating journey through time, exploring the many great works of Christian theology, literature, architecture, music, and art, inspired by the words and deeds of Jesus Christ.